I logged the first visit as a courtesy, because that was the word their liaison used, and because 6 minutes did not feel like a war. My name is Ilseth Corvain Mar, Bio-Warden of the Cradle Spine, and I have tended this hull for 41 years. She is 42 kilometers of grown bone alloy and threaded marrow channel, the last true vessel of the Miravash Concorde, and when the malignant growth took root in her forward marrow hull, a black, calcifying knot the length of a city, choking 14,000 kilometers of channel down to a whisper, I petitioned every fleet the Concorde still owned. None of them could touch it without opening her to the void, so I sent the request outward, to the small, blunt species 3 systems over, that our own archive listed only as unclassified, cooperative, unconfirmed capability. They sent one ship, not a fleet. One. It was called the ICSV Quiet Suture, 810 meters of dull gray hull with no visible weapon ports, and it entered the marrow hull without ceremony, unspooled a single filament of itself no thicker than my wrist, and in 6 minutes dissolved the knot down to clean tissue. Then it withdrew, its captain, a young man named Reyes Aldana who wore his rank like it embarrassed him, telling me through the translator that it had been a small job, ma'am, glad to help, and leaving before I could properly thank him. I catalogued it as a courtesy. I told the Concorde's war register that Earth's capability, whatever it truly was, had shown us perhaps a filament's worth of itself and no more. I believed that. I had 41 years of instruments telling me the knot was gone, the channel was clean, and the ship that cleaned it was already 3 systems away and would likely never be needed again. 19 days later, the marrow hull began to rot from the inside. Not the knot returning. The knot was gone. Verified gone. I checked the residue myself. This was something the knot had been sitting on top of. A latent spore colony, the Concorde's physicians called it, seeded generations ago by some enemy long extinct, dormant under the calcification, and starved of the nutrient stream the knot had been stealing. When the knot came out, the stream came back. The dormant thing woke up hungry. We named it the ash current blight, because it moved through her channels like a gray tide and left everything behind it the color and texture of cold ash. My own containment teams, 400 technicians, our best biosuppressant doctrine, 3 centuries of Concorde medical warcraft, held the blight to 11% of the marrow network for 6 days. We sealed 40 bulkhead valves by hand when the automated systems could not keep pace. We lost 11 technicians to channel collapse on the 3rd day alone. Good people whose names I read into the log myself because no one else was left near enough to do it. I slept 4 hours across that whole span, mostly upright, watching gray creep across scope after scope like frost finding the edges of a window. On the 7th day it broke containment in 2 new channels at once, both on the far side of the hull from where we had every resource massed, and I understood, the way you understand a thing you have been refusing to look at, that we would lose the cradle spine within the month if nothing changed. My deputy, a good man named Threl Vasa who had served this ship longer than I had lived, told me flatly that our doctrine had no answer for a threat that adapted to containment faster than we could redeploy against it. He was right. 3 centuries of Concorde medical warcraft had been built to fight things smaller than a hull, or larger than one, and never a thing that lived precisely at the scale of the hull itself. I sent the request again. I did not expect the same ship. I expected, if I am honest, something larger, the real capability behind the filament, the fleet the courtesy strike had only hinted at. The Quiet Suture came alone again. It arrived at the same docking scar as before, and this time it did not wait for ceremony or translator courtesies. Aldana's voice came through flat and unhurried. We read your containment data on the way in. We're going to need the whole marrow network open to us, Warden. All 14,000 kilometers. Might want your people clear of the forward third within the hour. I told him that was not possible without shutting down half the ship's living systems. He said that was, in fact, the plan, and that the cradle spine would not notice. I did not believe him. I ordered my staff clear of the forward third anyway, because I had learned, 19 days earlier, not to argue with the small gray ship. What happened next is the part of the log the Concorde's war register still will not certify, because there is no category for it in 300 years of doctrine. The Quiet Suture did not unspool one filament this time. It unspooled what its crew, in the after report, called the standing fraction, a number Aldana gave me almost apologetically, as though it embarrassed him the way his rank did. 4,300,000,000 individual threads, each finer than a hair, deployed simultaneously through every access port the hull possessed, flooding all 14,000 kilometers of marrow channel in under 90 seconds. I watched it happen on the internal scopes with my staff clustered behind me, and none of us spoke, because there was nothing in the Concorde's vocabulary for a single vessel moving with that kind of coordinated, silent totality. It did not burn the blight out. Burning would have cost tissue we could not regrow, the way our own suppressant fire had already cost us 6% of the healthy marrow we were trying to save. Instead, the threads found every infected cell individually, distinguished it from healthy tissue by some measure I still cannot name, and unmade it, cell by cell, channel by channel, in a wave that moved faster than the blight itself could spread, faster than our sensors could properly track it, faster, I realized with something colder than fear, than anything the Concorde's 3 centuries of warcraft had ever needed to be faster than. I watched the leading edge of that wave overtake the blight's own advance somewhere near the 9th kilometer marker, and for a moment, the two fronts ran together on the scope, gray against a color I have no word for, before the gray simply stopped existing. My staff had gone silent behind me by then. Threll Vasa, who had buried 11 of his own people 6 days earlier, was the one who finally said what none of the rest of us would, that whatever this was, it had not come from any doctrine a species builds when it is trying to survive an enemy. It had come from a doctrine built by a species that had stopped needing to worry about surviving one. 11 minutes, 14,000 kilometers, not one healthy cell lost that my staff could later find, though we looked for 3 days, running instruments finer than any we had used on ourselves, hunting for the cost of it, and finding none. When it withdrew, Aldana came through again, and this time I asked him directly, not through the register, not through protocol, just warden to captain, how much of the ship's true capacity we had seen. The courtesy strike, the 6 minutes, the filament, and now this. He was quiet long enough that I thought the link had failed. "Ma'am," he said finally, "you asked for a courtesy the first time. We gave you exactly that, enough to do the job, and no more. Because that's what you asked for and it seemed like the polite thing to do. This time you asked for the whole channel network open, so we opened the whole channel network. We've never actually had to show anyone what the ship does when nothing's held back. I'm not sure we know either. I have run the cradle spine for 41 years. I have fought 3 wars in her marrow halls and buried 200 of my own crew in her outer decks. I thought I understood scale. The Concorde taught scale as its first doctrine, numbers of ships, numbers of guns, numbers of the dead. What I understood, watching the quiet Suture withdraw into the dark with the same unhurried, apologetic silence it had arrived in both times, was that we had never once seen the actual size of what we were dealing with. We had seen only what we asked for. The 6 minutes had been a courtesy. The 11 had been an answer to a real question, finally asked in full, and even then, Aldana's voice told me, without any performance in it at all, that the ship itself did not know where its own ceiling was. 3,140 of my crew came home from the forward third that night. 214 did not. Lost in the 6 days before the Suture line arrived, not after. The marrow hall is clean now, cleaner than the Concorde's own instruments have ever certified a wound site. And I still walk it some nights when I cannot sleep, past the scar where the knot was, and the wider scar where the blight tried to take everything past it. I filed my final entry on the incident under a category the register had never used before, because there was no existing one that fit. Unclassified, cooperative, capacity unknown, do not request less than the truth again. We had asked for a courtesy the first time. What answered the second time was mercy, measured down to the cell, and I have not once since mistaken restraint for the limit of what they could do.